Welcome, everyone. My name is Gillian Wesley. I'm the Director of Communications at Efficiency Canada. And Efficiency Canada is housed at Carleton University, which is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. But we also have staff all across Canada. And so today I'm joining you from Jabuktuk, or Halifax. That's in Mi'kma'ki on the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And the Mi'kmaq have inhabited these lands since time immemorial. In fact, there's archaeological evidence of the Mi'kmaq dating back to more than 13,000 years on this land. Here in Mi'kma'ki, we're guided by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship. That's a series of different treaties, with the first signed back in 1725. And as we get started today, I would like to introduce to you the Mi'kmaq word for welcome, which is Jalasi. I understand that to mean there is space for you here, which I hope that you feel as we join together and learn. And so with that, Jalasi, welcome everyone to our webinar today. If you are joining us for the first time, this is our bi-weekly webinar, Discovery. We host it every 2 weeks, and our goal with these sessions is to bring together the sector and others who are interested in energy efficiency. We want to bring you together to learn, and we have a whole range of different topics. So we tried to showcase things like new research, present new findings, present pilots, and explore other topics that are relevant to the sector, and of course, highlight innovation. Today, we're going to talk about something really near and dear to my heart, which is the role that strategic communications can play in policy and programs change. But before we get started, I've got a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a great panel for you today, and those speakers will have a roundtable discussion. That's going to last for the first 25 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor to questions. If you have questions at any point during that roundtable discussion, you can submit your questions in the Q&A box at that time, or you can wait to the end when we do start that Q&A officially. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box. Please use that to ask your questions rather than the chat. The Q&A box lets everyone else see the questions that you've asked. They can upvote the things that they also want to hear about, and it helps us to more easily keep track of the questions that come in. But please use the chat as well. That's a great space. Like I said, please introduce yourself there. I will be sharing some links and resources as we make our way through today's session. But just for questions, please use the Q&A box. Okay, that's all for my housekeeping today. I'm pleased to welcome a really stellar lineup of speakers. We have Amber Bennett, the Executive Director of Re.Climate. We've got Rachel Mitchell, Director, Community Climate Initiatives Program Delivery for Clean Foundation. And we've got Maeve Cormick, Strategic Advisor for the Strategic Investment Board in Northern Ireland. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to get us started with some quick introductions. And Rachel, I'm going to go to you first. Can you tell us a bit about your role and the work that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm the Director of Community Climate Initiatives with Clean Foundation. We're primarily based out of Atlantic, Canada. So we have an office in Dartmouth, as well as Sydney in Nova Scotia. I'm actually on a bit of a field trip today. I'm at the Evergreen Brickwork at their office, meeting with a few folks. But in my role, I do focus on community work. So working a lot with local governments, municipalities. For the most part, that's in Nova Scotia, but also a couple initiatives that are supporting municipalities in New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland and Labrador as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Maeve, we'll go to you next. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Maeve Cormick and I work for the Strategic Investment Board, which is an arm's length body, an organisation in Northern Ireland which supports the government here with strategic advice, particularly in areas of infrastructure, for example. I have just very recently completed a 3-year piece of work on a new fuel poverty strategy for Northern Ireland, which was published in February. And prior to that, I also led on the development of Northern Ireland's energy strategy, the Path to Net Zero Energy, which was published back in, I think it was 2020. And before that, I worked for the renewable electricity industry, the trade association in Northern Ireland. So I fell into energy about 15 years ago, and I've never fallen out since.
Thank you, Maeve. And finally, Amber, over to you.
Hi, thank you. So Amber Bennett, I'm the Executive Director of Re.Climate, and we are also based at Carleton University. with our sister organization, Efficiency Canada, and we focus on climate change communications and engagement. And we offer research, resources, training, strategy, and we have a network of about 6,000 communicators across the country from various sorts of organizations between government, classic, climate, either advocacy or policy groups, as well as other academic researchers, media, journalists, and kind of a smattering of other sectors. So really happy to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to learn from you all today. For our first question, I'm hoping you can share a time when communications played a strategic role in helping shape policy or programs. And Amber, I'll throw it over to you first this time.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have a couple of slides. So while we bring those up, I'll dive in. So I think that the question or the title of the webinar is how narrative shaping narrative. And I think that no narrative has shaped or influenced energy and climate more than the affordability and inflation narrative. And so a couple of years ago, we wanted to take a look at how can we talk about affordability. And so my colleague, Dr. Louise Comeau, did a significant piece of research combining literature, interviews, survey, focus groups, et cetera. And we looked at how can we talk about affordability in a way that respects the difficulty that many Canadians were experiencing at the time. And I think that organizations were responding both with a combination of either, I guess we can't talk about climate, or we can't talk about climate programs. It's not appropriate. So that was one response. The other response that organizations took at the time was we do have incentives. We have these programs where we can talk to them about how we're helping to make certain technologies more affordable, such as electric vehicles or heat pumps. So we took a little deeper dive on that. So if we want to go to the next slide. Next slide. There we go. Yeah. So just on the right-hand side here, I'd encourage you to take a look. It's a guide that has much more detail. But overall, I think the research would show that for the most part, Canadians didn't believe that incentives actually made these technologies more affordable. And that affordability was only one part of the concern. There was also concerns about the reliability, how they could access them, how programs worked. And our advice out of this is communicating beyond cost, so that the technologies themselves offer a whole suite of benefits, and that some of the barriers were more about people's confidence in them, whether or not they had confidence in their ability to access the programs, how reliable those technologies would be. Do solar panels work? Do EVs work? Do heat pumps work in cold climates? And then the job really of communicators was to empower those people to access the programs. So there's some advice here. And really, I think what I would highlight, or the two pieces that we really picked up, is this idea of who people trusted to hear from about these programs were people who had already taken the programs. So homeowners or installers, contractors. And then we had some kind of direction around what are the messages or what were the stories that people wanted to hear. So next slide. So we ran a pilot. We chose the Durham region in Ontario, both because it offered an urban population or an urban area, but it also offered rural. And so we really dug into, okay, so how do we recruit messengers? How do we train messengers? We looked at audience identification. We identified homeowners through another organization's research, Clean Energy Canada. So we looked at homeowners who are both people who are working and retired, rural audiences, as well as women specifically. We identified and trained the messengers, so homeowners and contractors. We piloted a marketing mix. So we ran digital ads and with an approach with using an algorithm. So those messages where the framing was getting the most engagement, we invested more advertising in that and then dropped off those ads that were not getting engagement. We used direct mail, in-person events, and then we also had a multimedia media event where we had traditional media, but also we invited content creators and influencers. And so we have the final results of that coming out this fall. But I would say the kind of top line, some of the insights that came out of that work were around leading with how. So, how do these technologies work? Leading with the benefits of them. So, selling the brownie, comfortable home. Yes, you will see a decrease in energy use, convenience, etc. Also reinforcing social norms. So people like you, your neighbors, your friends and family, we polled and did some focus groups, and more than half people were twice as likely to use word of mouth from their friends and family to sway their decision on whether or not they would adopt these technologies. But also, and I think that this was one of the questions that people were holding, we found it was clear that we didn't need to drop the environmental benefits. They weren't the only motivating factor, but also they didn't harm the messaging. So those were some of the insights that came out of that. We'll have a full playbook that we're developing for municipalities who are running similar type programs with advice and just a very practical step-by-step guide of how do you increase engagement and uptake of the programs using the insights that we had from the research itself. So I'll leave it there. Happy to say more, but that's coming out this fall.
Thank you so much, Amber. What a great way to kickstart, and really interesting range of things there from audience research and message testing and messengers. So thank you so much for kicking us off. Maeve, I'm going to go next to you. Same question. Can you talk about a time where communications played a strategic role helping to shape policy change or programs?
Thank you very much. And again, hello to everyone here on the call. It's lovely to be here. I've just heard the word trust again and again, and I'm really glad Amber used it. We heard it again and again in the policy making progress, and who do you trust and how we can use that and use that in a positive way. I'm not going to talk about trust, I'm going to talk about stories, and it's a little bit of a story of policy development and also stories within that. Whenever we started work on a fuel poverty strategy, and of course fuel poverty is energy poverty, we define it differently, it's essentially the same thing. We had one statistic which represented fuel poverty in Northern Ireland. It was a number and it went up and then it went down and then it stayed the same. And that was year on year. It was a single statistic. And I knew that was one of the challenges that we had to address. It didn't tell me very much. It didn't tell us anything about the underlying reasons of why that number was going up or down. It didn't tell us about what impact that was having. So one of the first things we did was we said, let's move from one number to at least get some more numbers. So we looked out there to see what other data existed. And actually, our government already collected a lot of data related to fuel poverty in cold homes, but we hadn't just pulled it together into one place. So when we started the process, we used one indicator for fuel poverty. By the time we finished it, we had 11. And one of those was winter mortality. And one of them was your home. Are you able to pay your essential kind of fuel bills without going without? So some of these were subjective and some of them were objective, but we pulled them together into this basket of indicators. But that was still a limited amount of information. And at one point in the consultation process and developing a new strategy, it was suggested by a colleague that we have, in addition to our consultation, we have focus groups. And I will confess that I didn't really understand why. It wasn't an area that I was particularly familiar with. And I may even have argued against it once or twice, but I lost that argument and I'm very glad I did. We had a number of focus groups with women with disabilities, people working with people who lived with a terminal illness, travelers, the traveling community, a women's group who came together once a week for other purposes. And we basically went in and took over their meeting for a couple of times. And those focus groups absolutely humbled me because I'd come from a world of counting carbon and energy systems and energy management and demand side management. And I came to a world where people said, I'm afraid of the sound of the electricity beeping because so many people are on meters here. And they knew when it beeped, they had to put money into the meter and they might not have had that money. And the stories I heard through those focus groups were vital and they were hugely powerful. And they became powerful in a whole range of ways. First of all, we put some of those quotes and some of those stories into our consultation documents. We put those into our written reports and said, here's the numbers and here's what people told us. whenever we were speaking to our decision makers, so the communities committee at Stormont or the minister, you could very confidently relate to other people's stories because you had heard them firsthand. And they were experiences that I hadn't had up to that point. And whenever then people started talking about maybe the technical aspects of fuel poverty or energy problems that didn't relate to people, we could always bring it back to this is what this means. People in their own homes actually understand their energy needs very well and better than you ever will, but they may speak a different language about it. So that process was, as I say, humbling for me, but really crucial in being able to communicate what the strategy was important for. And it subsequently, when I just had a look earlier on at we have 33 actions contained within the strategy as well. And I think there's links coming up to the stakeholder report and the strategy itself. Of the 33 actions I went through, and I kind of pinpointed which of those arose as a result of hearing people's stories. And there are there were six of the 33 were directly impacted by hearing people's stories. One of them is actually a very specific commitment. So as I say, we're going to get better at our data, report more frequently, use a basket of indicators rather than one. But we're also going to ensure that we have lived experience embedded in our reporting process. So when we produce an annual report, it will just say number X went up and our Y went down. And there's a commitment now that we will have people's stories in that. Okay. And I think that's a way of ensuring that we keep people at the center of how this strategy is implemented. Now, we've only just launched it. There's 10 years of this strategy to go. I don't know how this will look in 5 years or 10 years, but that's certainly the intention. And the impact of those stories, I think, is really something that I probably didn't appreciate when I first began this journey.
Thank you so much, Maeve. Yes, I love that kind of that combination of pulling together the research and the policy and really bringing to life the impacts or the potential through those stories. Really great example. Rachel, we'll go next to you. Same question. Can you share a time when communications played a strategic role in helping shape policy or programs?
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because when I was thinking about this question and I had emailed a few staff with efficiency about, I don't see myself necessarily as a communications professional. And I do have a couple slides that I can refer to, but communications is vital in all of the work that we do. Climate is a massive issue and we're dealing with all the crises, all meeting at the same time, it feels. And that's certainly a significant demand on governments at all levels. And for my work, we're really focusing on local governments. And I think municipalities are the best level of governments. There's so much that can be done. And at the core of their mandate, it's about supporting the well-being of their residents and ensuring livability in their communities. When it comes to climate impacts, that's where we feel them. You feel them at home, at work. It's impacting your day-to-day, your way of life. And when we look at local climate solutions, there's so much that can be done. And for whatever reason, over the last however many years or decades, it always felt like climate was a big issue, something that the federal government had targets for and responsibilities, and the provincial government and the images we saw always felt far away from home. But certainly in the last couple of years, and it feels every month, there's something we can point to from our own backyard. And the province of Nova Scotia, a few years back, when developing their provincial climate action plan, sought to speak to everybody. What do we need? What does this plan need to look like? And when they heard from municipalities and community organizations, folks kept saying, we don't have enough capacity. We want to be involved in this work. We want to improve our communities, our community resilience, energy affordability, everything like that, but we don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the time, the resources to write the funding applications, to find the expertise, you name it. And that's where our program started. So on the next slide, I have some more information. The Community Climate Capacity Program is funded by Nova Scotia government and the Department of Environment and Climate Change. And we were built to support municipalities in Nova Scotia. So at the core, what we're trying to do is provide that capacity. And the program is designed to be flexible. We're not prescriptive by saying we need you to do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory or we need you to do an adaptation plan. We went to these communities and said, what do you need? How can we help? So we launched in the spring of 2024. and we welcomed our first 19 communities. And there was a competitive call to join the program, and it's completely free. And then just this past fall, we expanded to include 9 coastal municipalities, bringing our total to 28 participating communities. And so they receive a dedicated staff resource. We have one staff person working with about 2 to 3 communities each, providing that capacity, applying for funding, reviewing policies, and really seeing where we can embed climate into municipal services and municipal operations, and trying to ensure that work is not standalone. It's part of everything that a municipality does and part of their planning process, capital budgeting, everything, because really we know climate intersects with just about everything. And when it's placed as its own kind of nice to do, that's how it falls off the side or becomes the big complex issue that it is. And often there are opportunities with municipal planning. We can apply that climate lens and really maximize benefit and multi-solve when it comes to the work we're trying to do and ensuring the sustainability of municipal service delivery as well, and ensuring that it is efficient too. So that's the good news story of an exciting project that came from that engagement at the provincial level for their climate plan and has now translated into 28 communities being supported. And in our 2 years of working with the first 19, we've been able to secure $13.5 million in funding for these communities to do climate work. Looks like adaptation plans, living shoreline projects, active transportation, public transportation initiatives, lots of different things. And again, we were flexible in responding to the needs of our communities. And they certainly vary from one end of the province to the other and one coast to the other coasts. Yeah, it's been really exciting.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Really impressive results. And I really resonate with when you're talking about each municipality having a bit of a different approach in the same way that we think about audiences, often speaking, every community is a bit different. Their needs are a bit different, and how you get them point A to point B can be different as well. We are quickly coming up on time. I'm going to ask the second question as questions start coming into the chat. We talked a little bit about what's working. I'm curious to hear if you have any examples of where things tend to break down. So any barriers that you're facing right now when trying to use communications to shape policy or programs. And for this question, Rachel, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, and I think it's something I've touched on. That capacity piece, it feels the average person in our country is overwhelmed with everything. We have a lot to deal with in terms of affordability, our changing political landscape, and similarly with my main audience being local government officials and staff, there's a lot of attention on everything right now. And it's hard to find those opportunities to say, can we focus in on this? Or can we get our act together and get that funding application in to move a project forward? And I think too, the time that it takes from an idea, seeing it all the way through to implementation feels like forever. So that's certainly a barrier, is just that capacity and that attention, and the fact that our government officials and certainly citizens are really burdened with a number of challenges that are all intersecting, and climate is making everything harder. And so we have a big task ahead of us in terms of keeping it on the agenda. And I think a big part of that, which I touched on, is speaking about co-benefits and how this work is integral to everything we do and how it comes right in terms of affordability. It's essential when we talk about housing and improving our existing housing stock or building new housing, and wanting to make sure that the investments we're making in infrastructure are setting us up to future-proof that infrastructure with the climate impacts that we're already experiencing and we know we'll continue to experience. So that would be the point that I would go with. And I'll turn it back to you, Jillian, because I know we have more to cover.
No, thank you. That's great. Maybe I'll go to you next. Any barriers that you're experiencing now or places where things tend to break down?
I think one of the biggest challenges we have with energy efficiency is the visible versus the invisible. And that's in a few very specific ways. So when we think about the domestic property at home, insulation is invisible. Your loft insulation is invisible, your cavity wall insulations, but nobody sees it. A solar panel is seen, your neighbors see it, they kind of go, I like, look at that. They come and chat to you about it. Your electric vehicle charger is visible. You can get a new car, people come and chat. you get an electricity bill, your bill is visible. It comes through your door and it goes up. Even after you've got insulation installed, your bill goes up. It's visible. Your insulation is invisible. And I think that's one very specific problem. But it's also invisible because it makes something not happen. So it makes it makes heat not go through your walls or through your roof. And that kind of counterfactual. I insulated my roof and my electricity bill still went up. Therefore, that insulation isn't doing anything. And who knows what would have those bills looked like without that insulation. So there's an invisibility problem that we have with energy efficiency. And as I say, so it's actually practical in a couple of very specific ways. And that, therefore, to me, is how do we give something invisible worth and value? I used to make a joke if I could get a photograph of our minister holding a roll of insulation, I would have succeeded in my job. Insulation is not sexy. Give them the chance to have a photograph taken. They'll choose a shiny piece of technology. Ideally, they'll be wearing a hard hat. A roll of insulation, no, but actually that is a building block. I never managed it, never made that. But how do you take that insulation? How do you take that invisible thing? How do you give it worth? How do you give it value? How do you make it into a hero? We need to be kind of getting to that level. And how do you illustrate? I know you're still paying higher energy bills, but they would have been like this if you hadn't done this really good invisible thing. And I think that's one of the biggest communications challenges we have with energy efficiency is how do we make the invisible visible and give it value?
Absolutely. Really great points. Lots of comments in the chat as well. Amber, I'm going to go to you last on this question. Any barriers?
I just want to jump in and just say, I think that a lot of what Maeve just unpacked is very similar across the board. That idea that people don't trust that future cost savings, right? So whether it's energy efficiency or whether it's technologies, they don't trust that they'll see future cost savings. But that's why we landed on trusted messengers, because people who have gone through the program or have a similar home, et cetera, can talk about it and people trust it. That is not what I wanted to say, though. What I did want to say is I think one of the biggest shifts at the moment is the fractured information environment that we're all operating within. And so for communicators who are trying to promote these programs or communicate about issues or policies, et cetera, I think institutions, governments, et cetera, find themselves in an environment where the culture of their organization isn't really well suited. For many years, we took 2 weeks and we wrote our press release and we put it up the food chain, and then people approved it and then it came back down. We don't exist in that environment any longer. And reaching the public, breaking through to the public has become increasingly harder. Why we chose a variety of tactics is because frankly, you have to do it all. You need to be doing direct mail. You need to be doing traditional media relations. You need to be doing digital advertising. You need to be working with content creators and influencers. And going back to what Rachel said, it's like organizations don't always have the capacity, either the resources to undertake that or the skill set to do that. The upshot is the people who are able to organize and meet with their elected officials, they have an outsized influence on how I think elected officials who are making decisions about these programs, how they understand the problem or understand where community support is. If people are not hearing about something, then it has 2 points. It's one, they don't understand it. And two, the salience of it or the importance of it goes down. And so it's really hard to ask people to support something if they don't understand it and they're not hearing about it. So I think this kind of one of the really key situations that we are all dealing with as communicators is how do we take the precious amount of resources and capacities that we have and make choices that give us the best opportunity to break through? And I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Great. So we have just the one question in the chat so far, so we will be able to get to that. We do still have time. So before we go to questions, I just wanted to see if any of you as panelists had questions for one another. I know I've heard about some really interesting things today. My mind is buzzing with ideas. Is there anything that you've heard from each other that you want to build on or ask more about?
I just wanted to echo Maeve's point around stories. So I think that when we hear from community advocates or other organizations, They're even having a hard time when they're talking to government leaders or elected officials. They don't believe the community support. So it's 75% of your constituents believe this. It is the stories that they hear that is what's powerful. So I just want to echo as one of the most effective things that you can do is to strategically develop a couple of stories and use those consistently in how you're talking about whatever the issue might be. And then ideally, you can layer that with some broader public polling or something like that. But it will be the stories that they remember. It won't be the number. Yeah.
I just wanted to reflect a little bit on what Rachel said about communities. There is, now, unfortunately, not in Northern Ireland, it's in the Republic of Ireland, but the government has had a long-standing scheme of supporting sustainable energy communities. And they essentially provide support and mentoring. They go into communities and they try to find out where are people and how can they get engaged in their energy needs. And they have a model learn, plan, do. And an awful lot of really good work has come out of these sustainable energy communities, and it's all different depending on the community. Some are all guns blazing on getting energy efficiency measures installed in their houses. Some are saying, do you know what, we're on a tourist highway, but we don't have a tourist. We would like solar panels on our community building. And that works for us because that means that we can maybe install it, buy electric bikes and rent them out, and we can generate, and all those needs are different. And the importance of hearing what those needs are and meeting people and communities where they are. So don't say this is what this needs to look like or this is what you need to do. But you start by asking the questions. What does it look like in your area? So that's not a question, obviously, for Rachel, but it was just kind of reflection on some of the things that we have seen in Ireland as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I learned pretty early on that everyone's entry point into climate sustainability efficiency work looks different. And whether that's your neighbor or your municipality or even a business or an organization, it's important to find what makes people tick or what resonates with them. And insulation was the first thing I did in my home when I did my efficiency work. But yeah, you just have to find what speaks to people and never assume that it's always going to be the same argument either. Because yeah, one community has maybe had a significant shift in economic opportunities, and it's important to be speaking to solar and greening the grid and going from that angle. And of course, that looks different depending on where you live. But yeah, and it could be even the smallest of things. And I learned pretty early on never to dismiss that. For some folk, recycling is still going to be their entry point, and they may have a lot of pride in the recycling that happens in their home or their community. And you should never diminish that. That is still very valuable, even though it may not be the top thing on my agenda. It's important to harness that and to help people feel empowered, and just leads one step to the next. And I know we're in a hurry to advance this work, but at the same time, we have to be willing to take the time to have those conversations and to get to know people or get to know organizations to really help them move along their journey.
I had an idea, Maeve. I think you should make a cape out of an insulation. It's like both the unsung hero, but also the cape that keeps you warm as like a metaphor, and then give it to your mayor to wear.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That is what we should be doing. In fact, we'd make one for all the ministers and just get them all to stand proudly. It would be remembered.
Yeah.
Our senior director of policy strategy has had some great success dressing up as things like heat pumps and getting some good awareness and attention. So I second that idea. Okay, let's go to some questions from the audience. So we have a question here from Philip, who asks, is home energy labeling helping with those quote unquote invisible elements that we were talking about for resident energy efficiency? If not, why not? Or if yes, why yes?
I don't mind jumping in on that one because I did see that question in the chat and I was thinking about the same thing, making it visible. And that the obvious thing that came to mind was certainly here, if you can get an energy performance certificate. So that will tell you how energy efficient your home is. And it says your EPC band A, B, C, D, all the way down to G, or I think G. That is a label that tells you something. Nobody understands them. And the label's a bit rubbish. I'm an EPC band C. Is that good? Is that bad? So could we get better at saying, just using words? Poorly insulated, likely to get cold in winter. Would that speak to people a little bit more? But I also think that there's a little problem with energy efficiency labeling of appliances. And I have no expertise in this matter, but only from the point of view of buying a fridge freezer and getting something that was quadruple A plus rated. And I went, this must be great. It's an EU issue. They're all A, quadruple A plus. There's very rare you can get one. So it becomes meaningless. So if the industry would, I am assuming, I'm not saying for definite, but I'm assuming that the industry itself played a role in ensuring that things looked good for white goods. But when everything looks too good, nothing makes sense anymore. We could be better, and part of it is an education issue as well. So part of it's language and part of it's just education.
Yeah. I'll pick up here, not on the energy labeling piece, but I do think social norms are another important part of this. So what we know is when we compare, when people have a sense of how much energy they're using in relation to others, that's a powerful communication approach. So you're offering them what's normal, and then they can decide for themselves where they are in comparison to normal. So and maybe just to say, having worked on water metering, it's different, but it is very effective. And because people can see, oh, I'm using less water than I did last year, or I'm using more water than I did. So it really depends, I think, on education, but just to say social norms and hearing from other people is really one of the most kind of effective ways to be talking about this, to get through the jargon and down to like how it works and how it works for you and how it works for other people.
We have another question here, this time from Sarah, who asks, what do you think about the idea of shifting the framing of building energy improvements as a health and safety measure instead of an energy conservation measure? Do you think dropping the climate narrative and tying to health would catalyze more change?
Yeah, I can jump in. We did some focus groups, or a partner of ours did some focus groups recently. And where they landed is better buildings as a package. So buildings can be just better. They can be safer, they can be healthier. And in some cases, they can also help you help the environment. So I'd encourage us not to feel like we have to drop it, but profiling the benefits to the person that you're talking to and tailoring it to the concern that they have is obviously the most effective. So if people want safer buildings because they live in a particular area where they may be vulnerable to flooding or to wildfire smoke, et cetera, then maybe lean in on that. If they want a more beautiful building, then lean into better design, et cetera. So I think we should lean into the benefits, stop talking about how we get there, but rather what it looks like when you get there and what's the benefit. But I encourage us not to drop the environmental benefits because Canadians still care about it. They care, and it's a part of the important education that we're doing over the long term.
Okay, great. I think we have time for one more. So we have a question from Betsy. This one is for you, Maeve. It's interesting to hear people actually having to put coins in the electricity meter. On your point about insulation not being sexy, 100% agree. I have concerns about our sudden endorsement of shiny technology, particularly when it comes to replacement. When we insulate, we don't ever think of it again, all things working as they should. When we put in complex, expensive heat pumps through energy poverty programs, what will fund them when it is time for them to be replaced? Is Ireland thinking about future programming for replacement?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's actually a very live discussion, and it's a bit different in Ireland compared to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is certainly behind Ireland, which has mandated heat pumps and has rolled out a huge heat pump program. So I'll speak maybe to what's current in Northern Ireland, because we're trying to grapple with this problem just at this point in time, developing a new energy poverty scheme. There are two schemes being currently developed in Northern Ireland, two financial support schemes for households. One's priority is decarbonisation, and that is looking at really rolling out heat pumps, ensuring that the houses are reasonably well insulated, and then rolling out the heat pumps. The other is a whole house approach. So we will not put in a heat pump until we have ensured that your house is as efficient as it can possibly be. And that's a fuel poverty focused program. At the minute, and I think things will be different in the future, but at the minute, depending on whether you're thinking with your fuel poverty lens or your decarbonisation lens, you may have different solutions. There is not agreement yet on whether a house needs to be fully insulated as well as it can possibly be, fully retrofit before a heat pump goes in. Some people say yes, some people say no, you just do a certain standard and then it's good enough for a heat pump. In terms of replacement, all heating systems need replaced ultimately. I suppose these are the ones where we're saying we will, as government, fund them because with newer technology, people aren't used to them, they're not familiar, they're a requirement. So there probably would be a replacement program in future, but we're talking a long time down the road. And I think we need to be conscious as well of what are the costs now versus what are the costs in future. And if a house has been insulated well, if the technology has improved and they are cheaper in the future, we need to build our supply chain. We need to grow demand. We need to get the cost of these technologies down. The costs of wind plummeted in the last 15 years. The cost of solar plummeted in the last 15 years. And we need to make sure the same happens for our heating technologies as well. So there's an awful lot behind your question in terms of replacements, but I do agree with the principle of getting the fundamentals right first.
All right, we'll wrap it there. We've come to time already. Amber, Maeve, Rachel, I can't thank you enough for joining us today, sharing some of these great examples and taking some audience questions. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and is watching here today. If you would like to join us for a future discovery, our next discovery will be on May 8th, where we are going to be talking about our retrofit mission work. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you. Thanks.